Story 1, The Last Load. It was a quiet night on I-90, the kind truckers like Sam Eldridge dreaded the most. The highway stretched before him like an unspooling ribbon of shadow, with not a single pair of headlights visible in his mirrors. His rig rumbled steadily, the hum of its engine a lonely lullaby, as he pushed further into the endless dark. Sam, a seasoned driver with 15 years under his belt, wasn't one to scare easily. He'd weathered storms, dealt with shady freight brokers, and even survived a near jackknife on black ice. But there was something about this route, specifically this load, that made his neck hairs prickle. "Easy money," the dispatcher had said earlier that afternoon. "All you gotta do is get it from point A to point B, no questions asked." Sam's first mistake had been not asking questions. The load had been waiting for him at a dusty, desolate yard near Missoula. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the place, and the trailer itself had seen better days. Its paint was peeling, and the number stenciled on the side was barely legible. Worse, the manifest was suspiciously vague. Cargo fragile. Destination, Site 67. Sam shrugged it off. Dispatchers often got creative with paperwork, and Site 67 sounded like just another warehouse. Now, 3 hours into his haul, Sam's gut told him something was wrong. The trailer felt heavier than its listed weight, making his rig sluggish on inclines. But what really unnerved him were the noises. At first he thought it was just the shifting of cargo, common enough, especially on uneven roads. But these noises weren't normal, sharp, deliberate thuds that almost sounded like footsteps. The first time it happened, Sam had turned his radio up, letting classic rock drown out the noise. By the 10th thud, he was gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He finally pulled into a rest area. It was one of those shabby ones with a single vending machine and a flickering overhead light. The place was deserted, of course, but Sam was grateful for the stop. He needed to stretch his legs and check the trailer. As he approached the back of the rig, flashlight in hand, the air felt colder. He wasn't sure if it was the night or his nerves, but he zipped up his jacket and continued. The padlock on the trailer door was intact. That was a relief. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Against his better judgment, Sam climbed onto the bumper and shone his flashlight through the small ventilation slats. Inside, the beam revealed rows of crates stacked haphazardly. They were plain, wooden, and unmarked, except for one at the center, which had been smashed open. His stomach churned as his light caught what was inside. Claw marks gouged deep into the wood, and something glistening that looked suspiciously like blood. A loud bang reverberated from inside the trailer, making him nearly drop the flashlight. He stumbled back, his heart hammering. He didn't stick around to investigate further. Back in the cab, Sam locked the doors and floored it, desperate to put distance between himself and whatever was in the back. He considered calling the dispatcher to report the situation, but hesitated. What would he even say? That he thought something alive was in the trailer? He'd be laughed off the job, or worse, fired. 2 hours later, the uneasy quiet was shattered when the CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker 19, this is Ghost Rider," a gravelly voice drawled. "Anyone else out on I-90 tonight?" Sam grabbed the mic, relieved to hear another human voice. "This is Roadrunner," he replied using his handle. "I'm about 40 miles east of Coeur d'Alene. You?" "Not far," Ghost Rider said. "You hauling anything interesting tonight?" Sam hesitated. Truckers were notorious gossips, but this didn't feel like idle chatter. "Just freight," he said vaguely. A pause crackled through the line before Ghost Rider spoke again, his tone oddly serious. "You got one of those old government trailers, don't you?" Sam frowned. "What makes you say that?" "Seen you back in Missoula," Ghost Rider said. "Picked up from the same yard a while back." "Let me guess, they didn't tell you what's in it?" Sam's grip tightened on the mic. "Nope. Should I be worried?" Ghost Rider laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Depends. Did they give you a manifest with a Site 67 delivery?" Sam's blood ran cold. "Yeah, why?" "You need to pull over and ditch that trailer, now." The line went dead. For a moment, Sam sat frozen, staring at the CB as if willing Ghost Rider to come back. When he didn't, Sam cursed under his breath and refocused on the road. Whatever game this guy was playing, he wasn't falling for it. The highway curved sharply, the dense woods on either side swallowing his headlights. Suddenly, his GPS began to glitch, the screen flickering before going black entirely. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed." As if on cue, the engine sputtered. The rig shuddered violently before coming to a dead stop. Sam sat in stunned silence, the cab eerily quiet except for the faint creak of cooling metal. He reached for his phone, but it had no signal. Then he heard it, a low guttural growl coming from the trailer. Adrenaline surged as Sam grabbed the tire iron from behind his seat. He climbed out, the cold biting through his jacket, and approached the trailer. The growling grew louder, a sound so primal it sent shivers down his spine. He circled to the back, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The padlock was gone. Sam flung the trailer doors open, his tire iron at the ready. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the crates. Most were still intact, but the smashed one at the center was empty. Claw marks trailed down the wooden floor, leading to the edge of the trailer and disappearing into the forest beyond. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. Then he saw it. A pair of glowing red eyes staring back at him from the tree line. The creature stepped into the light, and Sam's breath caught in his throat. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, massive, with matted black fur and elongated limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its face was vaguely human, twisted into a grotesque snarl. Sam barely had time to react before it lunged. The next few moments were a blur. Sam swung the tire iron wildly, connecting with the creature's shoulder. It howled in pain, the sound reverberating through the forest like a chorus of banshees. He scrambled back into the cab, slamming the door shut just as the creature slammed into the side of the rig. The impact rocked the truck, but the reinforced door held. Sam fumbled with the keys, praying the engine would start. It roared to life on the third try, and he floored it, the tires screeching as the rig tore down the highway. The creature gave chase, its powerful limbs propelling it faster than Sam thought possible. He swerved wildly, trying to shake it, but it was relentless. Finally, he spotted lights in the distance, a truck stop. He barreled into the parking lot, nearly colliding with a parked semi. The creature stopped at the edge of the lot, its red eyes glaring at him before it melted back into the shadows. Inside the truck stop, Sam found Ghost Rider waiting for him. The older trucker nodded grimly, as if he'd been expecting this. "Didn't ditch the trailer, huh?" Sam shook his head, too shaken to speak. Ghost Rider sighed. "They call it a containment load. Government uses guys like us to move things they can't control. I tried to warn you." "What the hell was that thing?" Sam finally managed. "Something that shouldn't exist," Ghost Rider said. "And it won't stop until it gets what it's after." Sam didn't ask what that was. He didn't want to know. The two men sat in silence as the night stretched on, the weight of their shared knowledge pressing down like a physical force. Somewhere out there, in the dark woods along I-90, the creature waited, and Sam knew he wasn't going to make it to Site 67. Sam stared at Ghost Rider, his hands still trembling around the steaming cup of coffee the older trucker had handed him. The fluorescent lights of the truck stop buzzed faintly, and the smell of fried food wafted from the attached diner. But Sam's focus remained on what he'd just survived. "That thing," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. "It looked at me, not just like an animal. It knew me. I swear it smiled." Ghost Rider leaned back in his chair, the deep lines on his weathered face deepening. "Yeah, they do that. Smart ones anyway. Government's been messing with stuff for years, stuff that shouldn't exist. I've seen things out there that would make you rethink every truck stop ghost story you've heard." Sam leaned forward, his voice rising. "You mean to tell me this is normal? That these creatures are just out there running loose, and we're the suckers hauling them around?" Ghost Rider's expression turned grim. "Not loose, contained, or at least they're supposed to be. The second they break free, that's when the real trouble starts." Sam's mind raced. "Why me? Why my load? How did it get out?" Ghost Rider shrugged. "Could be you hit a bump in the road, could be someone in Missoula didn't secure it right, or maybe..." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe it's not the first time that trailer's gone bad. Some of those containers have history." "History?" Sam asked, his stomach sinking. Ghost Rider nodded, lowering his voice. "Ever heard of the Fairmont incident?" Sam shook his head. "About 5 years back," Ghost Rider began, "a load like yours went missing out in Montana. Driver never made it to his destination. Authorities found the rig a week later, doors open, trailer empty. What they didn't find was the driver or what had been inside." Sam's throat tightened. "You think that's what's in my trailer?" "I think," Ghost Rider said, leaning closer, "you're lucky to be alive. Whatever's in there, it ain't done with you yet." A dangerous proposition. The truck stop felt suffocating. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the hum of conversation from the other patrons too normal. Sam pushed back from the table, needing air. Outside, his rig loomed like a silent sentinel in the parking lot, its trailer bathed in the harsh glow of a sodium vapor lamp. He couldn't leave the trailer here. Even if he wanted to abandon the load, something told him that wasn't an option. Ghost Rider followed him out, lighting a cigarette as he leaned against the cab of Sam's truck. "What are you thinking, kid?" Sam ran a hand through his hair, his mind a whirl of questions with no good answers. "I'm thinking I need to get rid of this damn thing. But where and how?" Ghost Rider exhaled a plume of smoke. "There's a place, about 200 miles from here, deep in the hills. Used to be an old Air Force site, decommissioned, or so they say. If there's anywhere you can ditch that trailer and not feel the fallout, it's there." Sam frowned. "And how do you know about this place?" Ghost Rider smirked. "Let's just say I've had my share of bad hauls. You stick around long enough, you hear things." The older trucker's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken warnings. Sam didn't like the sound of it, but what choice did he have? "All right," he said finally. "Guide me there." Back on the road, the drive was tense. Ghost Rider took the lead in his own rig, his taillights glowing like distant beacons as they wound through the back roads. The GPS was useless now, and Sam relied entirely on Ghost Rider's CB instructions. The farther they drove, the darker the night seemed to become. The woods pressed close on either side, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. And then came the noises again. Thuds, like something heavy shifting in the trailer. Sam's hands tightened on the wheel. He glanced at the side mirrors, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. But the trailer doors remained closed. "Ghost Rider," he called over the CB, his voice tight. "It's moving again." "Keep your head on straight, Roadrunner," Ghost Rider replied. "We're almost there." But Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. His rearview mirror seemed darker than it should have been, as if the shadows inside the cab were alive. And then it spoke. A low guttural whisper just on the edge of hearing. "You can't run from me." Sam's heart nearly stopped. He whipped around, the cab's interior empty except for the faint glow of the dashboard. His breathing came fast and shallow, but he forced himself to focus on the road. The abandoned site. An hour later, they arrived at their destination. The site was little more than a crumbling concrete lot surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing. A faded sign warned in bold letters, "Restricted area, keep out." Ghost Rider parked his rig and climbed out, waving Sam forward. "This is it." Sam hesitated, staring at the desolate landscape. The place felt wrong, like the air itself carried a lingering charge. "You sure about this?" he asked as he stepped out of the cab. Ghost Rider nodded. "If there's anywhere that thing belongs, it's here. Place like this, it eats secrets." Sam moved to the back of the trailer, his tire iron in hand. Together, he and Ghost Rider unlatched the doors. Inside, the crate sat undisturbed, except for the broken one at the center. The claw marks were deeper now, gouged into the wood as if the creature had grown angrier. Ghost Rider grabbed a crowbar and motioned for Sam to help. "We need to drag that crate out. Whatever's inside, it stays here." Sam hesitated. "What if it gets out again?" Ghost Rider gave him a grim smile. "It won't, not here." The final confrontation, the moment they touched the crate, the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the wooden planks, and a deep, guttural growl reverberated through the trailer. Sam froze, his breath visible in the icy air. The growl turned into a roar, and before he could react, the creature burst forth. It was larger now, its fur matted with blood and its claws gleaming in the pale moonlight. Its red eyes locked onto Sam, filled with malevolent intelligence. Ghost Rider shouted something, but Sam couldn't hear over the pounding of his heart. The creature lunged and he swung the tire iron with all his strength. The blow connected, but it barely fazed the beast. It knocked Sam aside, its attention shifting to Ghost Rider. "Get the crate!" Ghost Rider yelled, backing toward his rig. "That's its anchor." Sam scrambled to his feet, his body aching. The creature was fast, but so was Ghost Rider. The older trucker dodged its attacks, drawing it away from the trailer. Sam climbed into the trailer, his hands trembling as he grabbed the broken crate. The moment he touched it, the growling stopped. The creature froze, its red eyes flickering like dying embers. It turned to face Sam, its expression almost pleading. Sam hesitated, the weight of the crate heavy in his arms. "Do it," Ghost Rider shouted. Sam threw the crate to the ground, smashing it into splinters. The creature let out an ear-piercing scream, its body convulsing as it dissolved into black smoke. The smoke swirled violently before being sucked into the ground, disappearing without a trace, and then silence. Aftermath. Sam and Ghost Rider stood in the cold night air, staring at the empty space where the creature had been. "You did good, kid," Ghost Rider said finally, clapping Sam on the shoulder. Sam didn't feel good. His hands were shaking, and his mind raced with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. "What now?" he asked. Ghost Rider lit another cigarette. "Now? You go back to your dispatcher and tell them you delivered the load. They'll ask you no questions and you'll give them no answers." "And you?" The older trucker smirked. "I've got my own road to follow." As Ghost Rider climbed into his rig and disappeared into the night, Sam was left alone with his thoughts and the haunting memory of glowing red eyes. The highway stretched before him, dark and empty, and he knew he'd never trust another easy load again. The drive home, the silence was deafening, as Sam sat alone in his cab, staring at the crumbling remains of the abandoned site in his mirrors. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, and he swore the cold from the trailer still clung to him. Sam took one final look at the spot where the creature had vanished. The air felt heavy, as though the ground itself remembered the unnatural presence. With a deep breath, he turned the key. The engine roared to life, steady and strong, as if reassuring him that the worst was over. He pulled away from the site, his rig rumbling back onto the dark road. The miles ticked by slowly, the highway stretching endlessly before him. For the first time in his career, Sam felt the weight of the road, a suffocating isolation that made his chest tighten. When he finally reached a familiar truck stop near Spokane, he pulled in, deciding he couldn't push through the night without rest. He parked at the far edge of the lot, away from the clusters of other rigs, and killed the engine. A quiet warning, the diner was brightly lit, its warmth a stark contrast to the chilling events of the night. Sam ordered a coffee and sat by the window, the hum of late-night chatter filling the air. As he sipped his drink, he noticed another driver sitting at the counter. The man wore a weathered leather jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Something about him seemed familiar. The man turned, catching Sam's eye. He nodded, then stood and walked over to his table. "You're the guy Ghost Rider helped out," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. Sam tensed. "How do you know about that?" The man slid into the booth across from him, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Word gets around. You're not the first driver to get tangled up in one of these loads, and you won't be the last." Sam frowned. "Who are you?" "Call me a friend," the man said. "And let me give you some advice. Next time you get a job like this, turn it down, no matter how much they offer. Some loads aren't worth the paycheck." Before Sam could reply, the man stood and walked out, disappearing into the night. Lingering shadows back in his rig, Sam locked the doors and settled into his bunk. He stared at the ceiling, the events of the night replaying in his mind. The creature's red eyes haunted him. Their malevolent gaze burned into his memory. As exhaustion finally pulled him under, Sam dreamed of endless highways and shadows that moved on their own. The next morning, he woke to find a small slip of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. The note read, "This isn't over. Watch your six." There was no signature. Sam crumpled the paper and tossed it aside, but the unease lingered. He had a sinking feeling that his life as a trucker would never be the same. Final words. Sam made it back to Missoula and delivered his report, sticking to Ghost Rider's advice. No details, no questions. His dispatcher didn't seem surprised, just nodded and handed him a new assignment. But Sam turned it down. For the first time in 15 years, he walked out of the yard without a haul. As he climbed into his rig and pulled onto the road, he felt a strange mix of relief and fear. The highway stretched ahead, endless and uncertain, but Sam knew one thing for sure: some roads should never be traveled, and some loads should never be hauled. Story 2. The gas station at mile marker 74. It was a cold, windy night when Jake's car began to sputter. He cursed under his breath as he glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle was dangerously close to E. He was driving through the outskirts of a small town, a place so quiet it felt like no one lived there anymore. The roads stretched endlessly in both directions, illuminated only by his car's dim headlights. Jake was heading home after a long day at work, and the last thing he wanted was to get stuck in the middle of nowhere. Just as panic began to set in, he spotted a flickering neon sign in the distance. Gas, it read, glowing faintly in the darkness. He sighed in relief and pulled into the small, rundown gas station. The building looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. The windows were grimy, the paint was peeling, and the air smelled faintly of oil and mildew. Jake parked his car next to the lone pump. He got out and looked around. The place seemed deserted. A bell jingled faintly as the door to the gas station swung open. A man emerged, his face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Need some gas?" the man asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," Jake replied, trying to sound casual. "Almost ran out." The man nodded and moved to the pump. As he worked, Jake noticed something off about him. His movements were stiff, almost robotic, and his eyes. When the man glanced at Jake, his eyes were unnervingly blank, like he wasn't really seeing him. Jake tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe the guy was just tired or old. He looked around the gas station instead. There was a small convenience store attached to the building. Its windows were so dirty that Jake couldn't see inside. "Traveling far?" the man asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Just heading home," Jake said. He didn't feel like making small talk. There was something about the man's tone that made him uneasy. "Be careful out there," the man said, his lips curling into a crooked smile. "Things happen on these roads at night." Jake forced a chuckle. "Yeah, sure." The man finished pumping the gas and handed Jake a receipt. "If you need anything, the store's open." Jake hesitated but decided to check it out. He was thirsty and needed a drink for the road. As he stepped inside, the door creaked loudly. The store was dimly lit, with shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. The air was stale, and there was a faint humming sound, like a distant generator. Jake grabbed a bottle of water and approached the counter. Behind it sat a woman with a vacant expression, her pale skin almost blending with the dim light. She didn't move or acknowledge him as he placed the water in front of her. Just this," Jake said awkwardly. The woman didn't respond. She stared past him, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Ma'am?" Jake said louder, glancing over his shoulder to see what she was looking at. There was nothing there. Suddenly she blinked and looked at him. "That'll be $1." Jake quickly handed her the money. As she gave him his change, her fingers brushed against his hand. They were ice cold. He shivered and stuffed the change into his pocket. "Have a safe trip," she said, her voice monotone. Jake muttered a thank you and hurried out of the store. He was about to get into his car when he noticed something strange. There was a rusty old pickup truck parked at the side of the building. Its windows were fogged up, but Jake could swear he saw movement inside. Curiosity got the better of him. He approached the truck cautiously and peered inside. The interior was dark, but he could make out a figure sitting in the driver's seat. The figure wasn't moving, just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He backed away and hurried to his car. As he started the engine, he glanced at the truck again. The figure was now turned towards him, its face obscured in shadow. Jake didn't wait to find out more. He sped out of the gas station and back onto the road. The neon gas sign flickered in his rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. The chase Jake drove for miles, trying to shake off the unsettling experience. The road was empty, and the only sound was the hum of his engine. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. Small towns like that always felt creepy at night, but then he saw headlights in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought it was another car, but something about the way the lights moved was strange. They didn't stay steady, but flickered and wobbled as if the vehicle behind him was struggling to stay on the road. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The lights grew closer and closer until they were almost blinding. He couldn't see the vehicle, just the intense glow of the headlights. "Calm down," he muttered to himself. "It's probably just some drunk driver." He slowed down slightly to let the car pass, but it didn't. Instead, it stayed right behind him, its headlights burning into his rearview mirror. Jake's heart pounded. He pressed the gas pedal and sped up, but the car behind him matched his speed. Panic set in. He floored the gas, racing down the dark road. The headlights followed, unrelenting. Jake tried to think of a plan. There had to be another town or a rest stop up ahead. Then, without warning, the headlights disappeared. Jake blinked, confused. He glanced in his mirrors, but there was nothing there, just darkness. He let out a shaky breath, relieved but still on edge. But his relief was short-lived. A loud thump came from the roof of his car. Jake swerved, nearly losing control. His breathing was ragged as he tried to figure out what had just happened. Another thump. Then a scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. Jake's hands shook as he gripped the wheel. He didn't dare look up. "Get off my car!" he shouted, his voice cracking. The scraping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the roof caved in slightly, and a face appeared at the top of the windshield. It was pale, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. The figure pressed its hands against the glass, smearing it with dark streaks. Jake screamed and slammed on the brakes. The figure flew off the car and disappeared into the darkness. He didn't wait to see what it was. He hit the gas and sped away. The final stop, Jake drove until he saw lights in the distance. It was another gas station, newer and brighter than the last one. He pulled in, his hands trembling as he turned off the engine. He stumbled out of the car and rushed inside. The clerk, a young man with a friendly face, looked up in surprise. "You okay, man?" the clerk asked. There's something out there," Jake stammered. "I don't know what it is, but it's following me." The clerk frowned. "What are you talking about?" Jake tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. The clerk looked concerned, but skeptical. "Listen," the clerk said, "why don't you sit down for a minute? I'll call someone to help." Jake nodded, his legs shaking as he sat in one of the chairs near the window. He watched the road nervously, expecting to see the headlights or the figure at any moment. But nothing happened. After a while, Jake began to relax. Maybe it was over. Maybe he had imagined the whole thing. The clerk handed him a cup of coffee. "Here, this might help." Jake took a sip, grateful for the warmth. He was starting to feel normal again when he noticed something strange. The reflection in the window didn't match what was behind him. Instead of the bright, clean gas station, the reflection showed the old, run-down one from earlier. Jake froze, his breath caught in his throat. He turned to the clerk, but the man was gone. The gas station was gone. He was sitting in his car, parked in front of the same decrepit station he had fled hours ago. And standing at the pump was the figure, staring at him with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. Jake screamed as the world went dark. It was a cold, windy night when Jake's car began to sputter. The sudden jerks of the vehicle broke the silence of the desolate highway, making his heart race. He glanced at the dashboard, and the glowing fuel gauge confirmed his worst fear. The needle was buried on E. "Great," he muttered. "Just my luck." He was miles away from civilization, driving through the outskirts of a small, forgotten town. There were no street lights, no other cars, and no sign of life. The moonlight barely lit the road ahead, and the trees lining the highway seemed to lean in, their branches clawing at the sky. As he debated pulling over to call for help, his phone buzzed in the cup holder. He picked it up. No signal. "Perfect," he muttered, tossing it aside. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, a black ribbon winding through the wilderness. Then, like an answer to an unspoken prayer, he saw it, a flickering neon sign in the distance. Gas! The letters blinked erratically, the S barely holding on to life. Relief washed over him as he coasted into the parking lot. First encounter, the gas station was ancient, a relic from a bygone era. The windows were so caked with grime that they appeared opaque. A single rusted gas pump stood at an awkward angle. The wind carried an unsettling sound, a faint whistle that seemed to echo through the empty lot. Jake pulled up to the pump and turned off his engine. He stepped out of the car and was hit by the smell of oil and something else, a faint metallic tang in the air that made his stomach turn. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing. There was no response. The pump had an old-fashioned handle, and Jake fumbled with it for a moment before realizing it wouldn't work without assistance. He was about to give up when a bell jingled faintly, and the door to the station creaked open. A man shuffled out. He wore a tattered jumpsuit, and his face was partially obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "Need some gas?" the man asked, his voice gravelly, as though he hadn't spoken in years. Jake nodded. "Yeah, I'm almost out." The man stared at him for a moment, then moved to the pump. His movements were deliberate and unnatural, like he was performing a ritual. Jake tried not to stare, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man's hands, which gripped the pump, were mottled with dark stains that didn't look like grease. "Traveling far?" the man asked, his tone flat. "Just heading home," Jake replied, avoiding eye contact. The man's lips curled into a crooked smile. "Be careful. This road's not safe at night." Jake forced a chuckle. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind." As the man pumped the gas, Jake glanced around. The gas station looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Weeds poked through the cracked asphalt, and the air was heavy with silence. Beyond the lot, the forest loomed, its shadows shifting as though alive. The man finished and handed Jake a receipt. "If you need anything, the store's open." Jake hesitated but decided to check it out. He was thirsty, and the thought of a cold drink was appealing. As he approached the building, the door swung open with a creak. Inside the store was dimly lit, the overhead lights flickering like dying fireflies. The shelves were lined with dusty items, their labels faded. A faint humming sound filled the air, and the temperature seemed unnaturally cold. Jake walked past rows of expired snacks and dented cans until he found the cooler. He grabbed a bottle of water and headed to the counter. Behind the register sat a woman, her skin pale as wax. Her long, stringy hair hung over her face, and her hands were folded neatly on the counter. She didn't move or acknowledge him. Jake cleared his throat. "Just this." The woman slowly lifted her head, and Jake noticed her eyes, dark and unblinking. She stared at him as though she were looking through him. "That'll be $1, she said, her voice monotone. Jake fumbled in his pocket and handed her the money. Her icy fingers brushed against his as she gave him his change. The contact sent a shiver down his spine. "Safe travels," she whispered, as he turned to leave. The truck in the shadows as Jake stepped outside. He noticed an old rusted pickup truck parked at the side of the building. Its windows were fogged up, and the faint glow of a cigarette ember was visible through the driver's side window. Something about the truck felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but the longer he stared, the more uneasy he became. He thought he saw movement inside, shadows shifting unnaturally. "Mind your business, Jake," he muttered to himself, climbing into his car. He started the engine and pulled out of the lot. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The truck's headlights flicked on and it pulled out after him. A game of cat and mouse, the truck followed at a steady pace, its headlights glowing ominously. Jake told himself it was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver lived nearby. But as the minutes passed, the truck stayed behind him, never getting closer, never falling back. "Okay, this is getting weird," Jake muttered. He pressed the gas pedal, speeding up, but the truck matched his pace. The road was empty and stretched into the darkness. Jake's pulse quickened as he gripped the steering wheel. He glanced in the mirror again, but this time the truck's headlights were gone. He exhaled, relieved, but his relief was short-lived. A loud thump came from the roof of his car, followed by a scraping sound. It was as if something or someone was crawling across the metal. Jake slammed on the brakes, and whatever was on the roof flew off, landing with a sickening crunch on the road behind him. He stared in horror as a figure slowly rose to its feet. It was tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured by shadow. The figure took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its head tilted to the side, and it let out a low, guttural growl. Jake didn't wait to see what would happen next. He floored the gas pedal, his tires screeching as he sped away. The revelation: Jake drove until his hands ached from gripping the wheel. When he saw the lights of another gas station up ahead, relief washed over him. He pulled in and stumbled inside, desperate for human contact. The clerk, a young man with a friendly smile, looked up. "You okay, man?" Jake shook his head. "There's something out there. It chased me. I don't know what it was." The clerk's smile faded. "What are you talking about?" Jake tried to explain, but the words sounded ridiculous even to him. The clerk listened, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "You sure you're not just tired? This road messes with people sometimes." Jake nodded weakly. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe the long drive and the Eerie gas station had gotten to him. As he turned to leave, the clerk called out, "Hey, you said you stopped at a station earlier, right? What did it look like?" Jake described the rundown station with its lone pump and eerie staff. The clerk's face turned pale. That station burned down 20 years ago. A fire killed everyone inside. Jake froze, his blood turning to ice. "What are you saying?" The clerk swallowed hard. "You're not the first person to come through here talking about it. They say the station shows up sometimes. For people who don't make it off the road." Jake's heart pounded as the lights in the store flickered. He turned to look out the window and his stomach dropped. His car was gone, replaced by the rusted pickup truck, and standing beside it was the figure, its hollow eyes locked on him. Jake stared at the rusted pickup truck outside the window, his breath shallow. His heart pounded as he watched the dark figure standing beside it. It was motionless, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. What is that?" Jake whispered. The clerk looked confused. "What are you talking about? There's nothing there." Jake pointed toward the window, but when he turned back, the truck and the figure were gone. The parking lot was empty. "You okay, man?" the clerk asked again, his tone now tinged with concern. Jake stumbled back, gripping the counter for support. His thoughts raced. Did I imagine that? Was it real? He shook his head, trying to clear his mind. "No, I'm fine," Jake muttered, though he felt anything but fine. He forced himself to focus, scanning the brightly lit gas station. The shelves were neatly stocked. The hum of the air conditioner was steady, and the fluorescent lights above flickered only faintly. It felt safe here, normal. Maybe the clerk was right. Maybe the long drive and lack of sleep were playing tricks on him. But something deep in his gut told him he wasn't crazy. A strange conversation. "Have you heard anything about this road?" Jake asked, his voice hesitant. The clerk glanced up from his phone. "What do you mean?" Jake hesitated, unsure how much to say. "I stopped at a gas station earlier. It didn't feel right. The people there, the whole place, something was off." The clerk frowned, his brow furrowing. "Was it the one by mile marker 74? Jake froze. "Yeah. How did you know?" The clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're not the first person to mention it. People say weird things happen there. Some say it's cursed. Others think it's haunted. A lot of folks who drive this road at night, well, they don't come back." Jake's mouth went dry. "What do you mean they don't come back?" The clerk shrugged, his expression dark. "Just stories, man. Cars found abandoned, no sign of the drivers. Or they turn up weeks later, miles away, dead or worse." Jake felt a chill creep down his spine. "What do you mean, worse?" The clerk hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, he said, "There's this one story. They say the station was run by this family, husband, wife, and their kid. Quiet folks, kept to themselves. But one night, someone tried to rob the place. The family fought back, and, let's just say it didn't end well. The whole station went up in flames." Jake felt his stomach churn. "What happened to them?" "No one really knows," the clerk said, "but they say the family never left. People swear they see them, working the pumps, running the register, like nothing ever happened." The lure of the station. Jake left the gas station feeling no better than when he arrived. He got into his car and started driving, his mind racing. The clerk's story gnawed at him, each word replaying in his head. As he drove, the forest on either side of the road seemed to press closer, the trees forming a tunnel of shadows. The night felt heavier, the darkness deeper. The hum of his engine was the only sound, but even that seemed muffled. Then, up ahead, he saw it. The neon sign. Gas. Jake slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching on the asphalt. His heart pounded as he stared at the sign. It was impossible. He had driven miles away from that place. There was no way he had looped back. "No," he whispered, "this can't be happening." But it was. The gas station stood there, just as decrepit and eerie as before. The pump, the dirty windows, the faint whistle of the wind, it was all exactly the same. Jake gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Don't stop," he told himself. "Keep driving." But as he tried to press the gas pedal, his foot froze. A strange compulsion gripped him, an almost magnetic pull drawing him back to the station. "No," he muttered, fighting the urge. "I'm not going back." But his car began to move, not forward but backward. The tires squealed as if dragged by an unseen force. Jake panicked, slamming the brake pedal, but the car didn't stop until it was parked in front of the pump. The engine died, and the lights flickered off. Jake sat in stunned silence, his breath shallow. The door to the station creaked open. The truth revealed this time, Jake didn't wait for someone to come out. He got out of the car, his legs trembling. The air felt colder now, and the metallic tang he had smelled earlier was stronger, almost suffocating. As he approached the door, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Scorched marks lined the edges of the building, as if it had been licked by flames. The glass on the windows wasn't just dirty, it was blackened with soot. Jake stepped inside. The store was darker than before, the shelves covered in thick layers of ash. The humming sound was louder now, almost deafening. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice shaking. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the man from earlier, his wide-brimmed hat tilted low. But something was different. His skin was charred, his eyes hollow sockets that glowed faintly red. "You came back," the man said, his voice crackling like fire. Jake stumbled back. "What do you want from me?" The man grinned, revealing blackened teeth. "You shouldn't have stopped. Now you're part of it." "Part of what?" Jake demanded, his voice rising. "The road," the man said. "It needs souls to keep it alive." The endless loop. Jake bolted out of the store, his heart racing. He jumped into his car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and he sped out of the lot, gravel spraying behind him. But no matter how far he drove, the road never changed. The same trees, the same shadows, the same suffocating darkness. And then, after what felt like hours, he saw it again. The neon sign. Gas. "No!" Jake screamed, slamming his fists on the steering wheel. The station appeared before him, identical in every way. His car slowed, the engine sputtering and dying as it coasted to a stop in front of the pump. Jake sat in silence, tears streaming down his face. He knew now there was no escape. The road had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before him. As the station door creaked open once more, Jake turned to face the figure stepping out. It wasn't the man this time. It was himself, hollow-eyed, charred and grinning. The road claims another. Jake's screams echoed into the night as the gas station's neon sign flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a new set of headlights appeared on the horizon. Another traveler unknowingly heading toward mile marker 74. And the cycle began again. Story 3, the vanishing route. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and violet as Lisa tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Beside her, Nate, her boyfriend, scrolled through the road trip playlist on his phone while their best friends, Mia and Jack, chatted in the back seat. They were headed to a secluded cabin in the mountains for the weekend, eager to escape their mundane routines. The road ahead stretched like an endless ribbon, bordered by dense forests that seemed to swallow the light. Nate glanced at the GPS. "We should have hit the turnoff by now. Did we pass it?" Lisa shook her head, her eyes fixed on the road. "No way. I've been keeping an eye out. It's supposed to be 10 miles from the gas station." Jack leaned forward. "Maybe the GPS is glitching. Let's just keep going. We'll see a sign eventually." They drove in silence for another 20 minutes. The road, once smooth and well-paved, began to narrow and crack, the asphalt giving way to gravel. Trees loomed closer, their branches gnarled like clawing hands. "This doesn't feel right," Mia murmured, her voice uneasy. "It's too dark, and we haven't seen another car in ages." Nate checked the GPS again, but the screen showed nothing but a spinning icon. "No signal," he muttered. "Great. Should we turn back?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with worry. Before anyone could answer, the headlights illuminated a sign on the side of the road. "Willow Creek, 5 miles. The letters were faded, the wooden post splintered with age. "Finally," Nate said, relief evident in his tone. "Let's just get to the cabin." As they pressed on, the forest seemed to close in around them. The air grew colder, and an unsettling stillness replaced the usual chirping of crickets and rustling of leaves. Lisa glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed Mia clutching Jack's arm, her face pale. "Guys, relax," Lisa said, though she couldn't ignore the unease creeping into her own mind. "It's just a quiet area." Quiet, yes, but too quiet. The gravel road eventually ended at an old wooden bridge spanning a shallow creek. The water below shimmered eerily under the headlights. Beyond the bridge was a clearing where a rundown cabin stood. Its windows were dark, and the porch sagged as though tired of holding itself upright. "This can't be it," Mia whispered. "The pictures online look nothing like this." "Well, it's the only cabin here," Nate said, trying to sound optimistic. "Maybe it looks better in the daylight." They unloaded their bags and approached the cabin. The front door creaked loudly as Lisa pushed it open, revealing a dusty interior. Cobwebs hung from the corners, and the furniture was covered with sheets yellowed with age. "This is creepy as hell," Mia muttered, refusing to let go of Jack's arm. "Let's just get some sleep," Nate suggested. "We'll figure everything out in the morning." Nightfall enveloped the cabin in an oppressive darkness. Inside, the friends gathered around the fireplace, the crackling flames offering some comfort. Jack rummaged through an old cabinet and pulled out a dusty journal. "Hey, check this out," he said, flipping through its pages. The handwriting was erratic, the ink smeared in places. The entries spoke of strange happenings, shadows moving without light, whispers in the woods, and visitors who disappeared without a trace. "Stop reading that," Mia snapped. "You're going to freak everyone out." "It's just a story," Jack said, but his voice wavered. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from outside. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Lisa asked, her heart racing. Nate grabbed a flashlight. "Probably an animal. I'll check it out." "No way!" Lisa grabbed his arm. "Don't go out there alone." Reluctantly, they all ventured onto the porch together. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the trees and the empty road they had come from. The air was heavy with an unnatural silence. "See?" "Nothing," Nate said, though his voice lacked conviction. As they turned to go back inside, Lisa noticed something on the ground near the bridge. It was a shoe, Mia's shoe. "Mia, how did your shoe get out here?" Lisa asked, holding it up. Mia stared, wide-eyed. "I was wearing that earlier." "How?" A chilling realization settled over them. Something, or someone, had been near the cabin. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old cabin felt amplified, every shadow more sinister. Around 3 a.m. Lisa heard it, a faint whispering, like voices carried by the wind. She nudged Nate awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Nate listened, his face growing pale. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if coming from right outside the window. Jack and Mia stirred, their fear palpable. "What's happening?" Jack asked. The whispers suddenly stopped, replaced by a loud thud against the door. The friends huddled together as the door rattled violently, as if someone or something was trying to force its way in. "Lock it, barricade it," Nate shouted. They pushed furniture against the door, their breaths ragged. The banging continued, relentless and frenzied. And then, as abruptly as it started, it stopped. "Is it gone?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. "But there's no second floor," Lisa whispered, her stomach knotting with dread. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately, as if whatever was upstairs knew they were listening. Suddenly, a guttural voice rasped, "Why are you here?" Lisa's scream pierced the silence. The group bolted for the car, abandoning their bags in the Eerie cabin. Nate fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as the engine roared to life. They sped down the gravel road, the cabin disappearing into the darkness behind them. The friends didn't stop until they reached the nearest town at dawn. Exhausted and terrified, they found a diner and explained what had happened to the waitress. Her expression turned grim. "Willow Creek?" she asked. "That place has been abandoned for decades. Folks around here say it's cursed, people who go there. Well, they don't always come back." Lisa's blood ran cold. "But we saw a sign for it. The GPS even directed us there." The waitress shook her head. "There's no sign, and there's no road that leads there anymore. Not for years." The friends exchanged horrified glances. If the road didn't exist, then where had they been? And more importantly, what had they escaped from? They never found out, and none of them ever spoke of the trip again. But sometimes, when Lisa closed her eyes, she swore she could still hear the whispers. As the friends sat in the diner, sipping steaming cups of coffee, the world outside felt surreal. The morning sun rising over the quiet town should have been a welcome sight, yet it only served to highlight their growing unease. Nate stared into his cup, stirring it absent-mindedly. "Do you think we imagined it?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa shot him a sharp look. "Imagined what? The whispers? The footsteps? The shoe that somehow ended up outside? Or the banging on the door? Come on, Nate, we all heard it." Jack nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. "She's right. That wasn't just paranoia. Something wanted us to be there, and it wanted us to stay." Mia shuddered. "But why? What was it? And how did we get there if there's no road?" The waitress, who had been quietly eavesdropping, interrupted hesitantly. "You said you saw a sign for Willow Creek, right?" "Yeah," Nate replied. "It was old, barely legible." The woman leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That sign hasn't been there for years. It was taken down after too many people disappeared. But some say the place calls to you, especially at night. It shows itself to those it wants." Mia paled. "Are you saying that cabin wanted us there?" The waitress gave a solemn nod. I don't know what exactly happens in that place, but every story I've heard ends the same. People go and they don't come back. If you escaped, you're lucky. But she trailed off, her eyes darkening with an unspoken warning. But what? Jack pressed, his voice edged with desperation. The waitress hesitated before continuing. Sometimes it doesn't let you go completely. People who've left say they feel watched, like the place isn't done with them yet. The drive back to their hometown was suffused with tension. Despite the sunlight streaming through the windows, Lisa kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking behind them. Mia sat silently, her gaze fixed on the passing trees. "Do you think it'll follow us?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "No," Nate said firmly, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his fear. "We're done with it. We're not going back, and that's the end of it." For a while, life returned to normal, or so it seemed. The group went back to their routines, trying to forget the horrors of that night. But the strange occurrences began almost immediately. Lisa was the first to notice. At night, her phone would ring, displaying an unknown number. Whenever she answered, all she heard was static, punctuated by faint whispers she couldn't make out. She started keeping her phone on silent, but the calls persisted. Nate's experience was different. He began waking up at exactly 3:13 a.m. every night, drenched in sweat. At first, he dismissed it as a lingering after effect of the trip, but then he started hearing the footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through his apartment. Yet, when he checked, no one was ever there. Mia began seeing shadows in her peripheral vision. They flitted across her living room and bedroom walls, disappearing when she turned her head. And Jack, always the skeptic, was plagued by nightmares so vivid he would wake up screaming, the sensation of cold hands gripping his arms still lingering. One night, about 2 weeks after their return, Lisa decided to confront the others. She invited them all to her apartment, determined to talk about what was happening. As they sat around her living room, the atmosphere was thick with unease. "It's not over, is it?" Lisa asked, breaking the silence. "No," Mia whispered. "I don't think it ever will be." Jack rubbed his face, looking more exhausted than any of them had ever seen him. "We left that place, but it's like it didn't leave us." "Maybe we should go back," Nate said suddenly. Everyone turned to him, horrified. "Are you insane?" Lisa snapped. "Why would we ever go back there?" "To end it," Nate insisted. "If we're still connected to that place, maybe we have to confront it. Maybe we left something behind, and it's using that to keep hold of us." Mia stood abruptly. "You can do whatever you want, Nate, but I'm not going back to that nightmare. I'd rather deal with this than risk what might happen if we return." Despite the protests, Nate was resolute. The following weekend, he set out alone, determined to find the road to Willow Creek. He left voicemails for Lisa, Mia, and Jack, urging them to join him, but no one responded. 3 days later, Nate's car was found abandoned on the side of a highway, its doors wide open. There was no sign of Nate. Lisa, Mia, and Jack were devastated. Guilt consumed them, but fear held them back from returning to search for him. Weeks passed, then months, and Nate's disappearance became just another unsolved mystery. 1 year later, Lisa received a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single item, the dusty journal Jack had found in the cabin. It was open to a page near the end, where new words had been scrawled in shaky handwriting. "You can't escape it. It's always watching." Beneath the words was a crude drawing of the cabin, its windows dark and foreboding, and standing in the doorway was a figure, its face obscured but its hollow eyes unmistakable. Lisa slammed the journal shut, her hands trembling. She knew, deep down, that the nightmare wasn't over. It would never be over. Lisa stared at the journal on her kitchen table, her heart pounding in her chest. Her first instinct was to throw it out, burn it, destroy it in any way possible. But something about the ominous drawing, the dark windows, the hollow-eyed figure, paralyzed her. Was this a warning, a taunt, or something worse? Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Mia. Did you get something in the mail?" Mia's voice was shaky, almost a whisper. Lisa's stomach dropped. "You got one too?" "Yes, it's the journal, Lisa, the one from the cabin. I thought Jack had left it there, but it's here, and there's new writing in it." Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. "What does yours say?" It says." Mia hesitated, her voice cracking. "Come back or it'll take more." The room seemed to tilt around Lisa. "More? What does that even mean? I don't know, Mia whispered. But Lisa, I think it means Nate. We have to go back. No, Lisa said firmly, though her voice betrayed her fear. We can't. We barely made it out alive. If we go back, who knows what'll happen? Do you think we can just ignore this? Mia asked, her tone rising. It hasn't stopped, Lisa. The whispers, the shadows. It's getting worse. Last night, I heard Nate's voice. He was calling my name. Lisa froze. What did he say? He kept saying, "Help me, please help me," over and over. I'm scared, Lisa. I think he's trapped there. That evening, Lisa reluctantly called Jack. He had become increasingly withdrawn since Nate's disappearance, isolating himself from the group. When she finally reached him, his voice was flat, almost emotionless. You got the journal too, didn't you? Lisa asked. Yeah, Jack said after a long pause. It's sitting right in front of me. What does it say? Jack hesitated. It says, you can't hide. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. Mia wants to go back. She thinks Nate's still alive, that he's trapped there. She's wrong, Jack said bluntly. Nate's gone, and if we go back, we'll be next. But what if she's right? Lisa pressed. What if we're abandoning him? Jack sighed heavily. I don't think it's Nate anymore, Lisa. Whatever's there, it's using him, or the memory of him. It's baiting us. Despite Jack's warning, Mia's pleas grew increasingly desperate. Lisa found herself caught between her own fear and the nagging guilt that they might have left Nate behind. The shadows in her apartment grew darker, the whispers louder. And then, one night, the decision was made for her. Lisa woke to the sound of footsteps in her hallway. She froze, clutching the blankets to her chest. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they stopped just outside her bedroom door. She held her breath, listening intently. Lisa. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was Nate's voice. Her heart raced. Nate? She called out hesitantly. The door creaked open slightly, but no one was there. Just the same oppressive darkness that had haunted her since that night at the cabin. She didn't sleep again. The next morning, Lisa and Mia packed their bags and set out for Willow Creek. Jack refused to join them, warning that they were walking into a trap, but his protests fell on deaf ears. Whatever the risk, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they had to face the horror they had escaped, or it would never stop. The drive felt eerily familiar. The sun dipped below the horizon as they turned onto the gravel road, the dense forest closing in around them. Mia clutched the journal in her lap, her fingers trembling. Do you think it'll be the same? She asked. Lisa glanced at her, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. I don't know. I just hope we're doing the right thing. When they reached the wooden bridge, a chill settled over them. The cabin stood in the clearing, exactly as they remembered it. The sagging porch, the dark windows, the air heavy with an unspoken threat. We go in, we look for Nate, and we leave, Lisa said, her voice firmer than she felt. Inside, the cabin was almost unchanged. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the corners. The journal Mia carried seemed to grow heavier with each step. Nate? Lisa called out, her voice echoing through the empty rooms. There was no response. As they moved deeper into the cabin, the temperature plummeted. Their breaths fogged in the frigid air. The whispers began again, faint at first, but growing louder with every passing second. Do you hear that? Mia whispered, clutching Lisa's arm. Lisa nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. The whispers were coming from the back room, the same room where they had found the journal the first time. Slowly, they pushed open the door. The room was empty, save for a large mirror hanging on the far wall. The glass was cracked, its surface cloudy, but it seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Nate? Lisa called again, her voice trembling. For a moment, the mirror flickered, and Nate's face appeared in the glass. His expression was desperate, his hands pressed against the surface as if trying to break through. Help me, he pleaded, or please help me. Mia stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Nate, we're here. How do we get you out? The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a storm. The room seemed to close in, the walls warping and twisting. Lisa grabbed Mia's arm. We have to go, now. No, Mia screamed, reaching for the mirror. We can't leave him. The mirror shattered, the shards falling to the ground with a deafening crash. For a moment, everything was still, and then the room exploded into chaos. Shadows surged from the walls, their shapes twisting and writhing as they lunged toward the women. The whispers became screams, a cacophony of terror that drowned out all rational thought. Lisa grabbed Mia and pulled her toward the door. "Run!" she screamed. They bolted from the cabin, the shadows chasing them into the night. As they crossed the bridge, the whispers suddenly stopped. The forest fell silent, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. When they reached the car, they didn't look back. They drove through the night, the cabin disappearing behind them like a fading nightmare. Lisa and Mia never spoke of what they saw in the mirror, or the shadows that chased them. But they knew, deep down, that the cabin wasn't finished with them. And neither was Nate. The journals never came back, but the whispers lingered. At night, when the world was quiet, Lisa could